Professor Krylov is quite an inspiration. A lot of these scientists, these STEM folks, are standing up and saying no more of this nonsense, are absolutely an inspiration to a lot of us who want to see the craziness that we see now coming into STEM stop. If you're not paying attention to Professor Anna Krylov and a few others, you really should be if you're in the science side of things, because she, as I have documented now, she's been brilliant many times over in what is the most common method of communication and remains so, and is the most revered form of communication for our respective fields of science and what have you. She has been very vocal, pushing back on a lot of the postmodernist influence on science and STEM in particular. She is brilliant at it. I very much appreciate what she does, and hence why I keep coming back to magnify this, because these are the scientists that you can support. If you can remember, the first time her work appeared on this channel was with her article last year on the peril of politicizing science, which was brilliantly written. I absolutely loved it. And she's returned this time. This is the third one of hers that I've covered. I know she's written more of this, but this is actually new to me. I haven't read it yet, so this is going to be a little bit of fresh reaction. But it is a necessity to read through these kinds of things, if only to remind ourselves sometimes that not everybody's gone crazy. If only for that, but also as a point of encouragement, this is someone you should follow. I don't think she has a Twitter. I don't know off the top of my head, but I will have to check on that. But she is fantastic at all of these things and well-written understanding of. She's a very excellent understanding of Western Enlightenment values and the normative principles of science and the whole works. And I really, really highly recommend talking with her. Well, not talking with her, but, well, if you get to talk with her. But I really highly recommend following what she has to say. This was published yesterday in Nachrichten aus der Chemie, which is a German chemistry journal. But the internet and journals being what they are, internationally available, and I highly encourage you to read it. Of course, it will be linked in the description. Scientists must resist cancel culture, and the abstract is very simple. Science should reject all forms of censorship and defend the core principles of science, the free exchange of ideas. Precisely and absolutely, that is exactly what it should be. The free exchange of ideas, the freedom to debate and discuss is utterly essential at the core purpose, the telos of science in general, to pursue the truth. And you cannot do that if one side of the ideas is utterly suppressed for whatever reason. Censorship, the suppression or prohibition of any books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security, has been used by illiberal regimes throughout history to suppress viewpoint diversity. Scientists who challenge dominant ideologies have been subjected to various forms of cancellation, ostracism, imprisonment, exile, and death. Now, in the peril of politicizing science, Professor Krylov wrote very extensively on what happened in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany with respect to scientists, and how it can end up. So that's kind of what she's referring to in here, probably, is my guess, is what happened to scientists there who didn't toe the politically acceptable narrative. A lot of them ended up dead in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Anyway, Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. I believe, Plato wrote about it in one of his works, actually. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. The discoveries of Galileo, Bruno, and Copernicus challenged the tenets of the Catholic Church and the dominant ideology at the time. The Church responded by putting Galileo under house arrest and burning Bruno at the stake. Copernicus evaded cancellation by self-censoring, and Darwin delayed the publication of his findings for decades. In Soviet Russia, the Communist Party outlawed genetics and cybernetics, declaring them bourgeois pseudoscience. Trofim Lysenko again. Don't forget, Trofim Lysenko, probably in the history of science, is probably the greatest mass murderer in history because of his push for declaring Mendelian genetics to be pseudoscience in Russia, and as such, huge famine resulted not too long after that when Stalin embraced it. Thousands lost their jobs, freedom, and lives for their crimes against Marxist ideology. Fun thing about Galileo, Galileo did pass away while he was still under house arrest for pissing off the Catholic Church. And I want to say it was during the papalship of John Paul II when the Catholic Church finally apologized for that. It was something along that line. As a Roman Catholic myself, I find it humorous when those things happen. Sometimes you realize you're wrong, and it only takes a few hundred years to realize it. So I do know the church did actually formally apologize for that. I believe it was during the papalship of John Paul II. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes extended ideological control for suppressing scholarship because of its content to suppressing scholarship because of the political views or identity of the scientist. In Soviet Russia, many were barred from research, jailed, or executed because of their identity, religion, or political views, by means such as quotas on the Jews, for example, and de facto party membership requirements for admission to university or leadership in academia. These practices persisted long after Stalin. The physicist Sakharov was ostracized and subjected to internal exile for opposing nuclear arms and supporting human rights. The ideologues of Nazi Germany were also obsessed with the political views and identity, understood as racial purity, of scientists. Liberals were jailed and murdered. Jews, or Aryans married to Jewesses, their words, not mine, that's what happened back then, were expelled from academia. Why censorship? From antiquity, censorship has been carried out for the greater good. The censors are not out to suppress progress, but to protect society from ideas that their ideology deems harmful or offensive. The inquisitors burned heretics to save them and others who might be corrupted by their heresies from eternal damnation. The Soviets censored ideas and persecuted scientists to liberate the oppressed masses and build a better world. I'm trying to remember who said it, but I remember hearing it some time ago. Evil things don't just happen because somebody wakes up and decides they're going to be evil. They always think they're doing something good. With these kind of mass things, there's always a thought that for whatever reason in the twisted mind, they're doing something good. And so what Krylov et al. Here are pointing out is entirely relevant to the situation that, we're protecting people from offensive ideas. We're protecting people from ideas that might disturb them. But then you don't really advance as a society. You can't pursue the truth. You don't really advance as a society, and it's all sorts of a mess. The damage inflicted by the ideological control of science by totalitarian regimes is well documented. A recent article reminds us, quote, despite vast natural and human resources, the USSR lost the Cold War, crumbled, and collapsed. Government control over science was a grand failure. Today, Russia is hopelessly behind the West in both technology and quality of life. When you start taking control of science and determining what can and cannot be said and getting rid of people because of their identities and things like that, or the cancellation based on identity, it just wrecks scientific progress like you would not believe. I have read a lot about that part of history since I read Professor Krylov's original article on the peril of politicizing science. It's one of the reasons some of the things we see so much kind of scare me going on now. Today, we see a growing intrusion of illiberal ideology, which challenges the core principles of liberal epistemology into our institutions. As with past illiberal ideologies, free speech is the first target, and censorship the main instrument of the new bearers of truth in capitals. And truth in capitals has to do with propaganda, in a sense. It's the truth coming from the state. In Soviet Russia, it was a newspaper that had the Russian word for truth at the top that did the primary mouthpiece there. It was called Pravda. Dissent is suppressed by the cancellation of non-conforming individuals. But there are important differences from the past. In Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, censorship was imposed from the top by the state and was enabled by grassroots responses ranging from complacency to enthusiastic embrace and opportunism, the faithful advancing their careers at the expense of the cancelled. The modern form, cancel culture. Suppression today takes the form of cancel culture, censorship administered not by repressive governments, but by Twitter vigilantes, an outrage mob whose goal is to sanction or punish individuals or organizations they consider responsible for something that offends, insults, or affronts their beliefs, values, or feelings. Consider the cancellation of chemist Tomasz Hudlicki. I probably butchered the pronunciation, I apologize. Who in 2020 published an essay in Agvanti Chemie. Again, I'm not great at pronouncing German and a whole bunch of different languages, so I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation of some words. Discussing the progress of organic synthesis and expressing his views on the hiring practices and training of scientists and the integrity of the literature. The publication sparked a Twitter firestorm that condemned the article as offensive, inflammatory, the content as alienating, hurtful, xenophobic, the paper as abhorrent, egregious, and Hudlicki as racist, misogynist, a slithering insect. Ooh. Nasty when they go do that. 16 editorial board members resigned in protest of the publication. The journal removed the paper from its website, an unprecedented act, issued an abject apology, suspended 2 editors, and began an internal investigation. Condemnation ensued in blogs, journals, and statements issued by chemical societies. We invite readers to read Hudlicki's essay and his elaboration to the National Academy of Scholars. I'm going to go pull that up and read it myself after this, I think. Whether one agrees with his views or not, a civilized debate should have ensued, not an avalanche of insults. The journal could have invited a rebuttal, instead it capitulated to the mob. So, I want to make a point on this right here. If you were at Thursday Review last week, I covered a PNAS article called The Rise and Fall of Rationality in Language. And it's really interesting because in that article from the 1980s onward, the amount of rational use in the English language started to drop, and a lot of emotional-laden words in the English language usage. They increased their frequency of usage from the 1980s, and very much so after 2007. And so part of the reason I consider this interesting here is because a lot of these kinds of cancel culture things didn't happen in the 1980s. Admittedly, we didn't have social media in the 1980s, so that's part of it. But at the same time, I feel this hurts me. It can't be there because it hurts me. We've taught a generation at this point, and again, I point you over to the reason we learned, because Deb over there does talk about this at length, and I find it absolutely fascinating, some of the things she points out with how education is teaching this and then what it's going to mean. But we're teaching people that they should be offended by certain things, or if it offends them, it can't exist. Or if it offends somebody, it can't exist. And that is a pretty damn bad way to go about it. And whatever you think of some of the other folks in the last week who have come under criticism for what they said, they should be allowed to say it, and they shouldn't lose their jobs for saying it either. That's my general rule of practice on anything. You shouldn't necessarily lose your job unless you are directly inciting physical harm against someone. That's where I kind of draw the line. But beyond that, you shouldn't lose your job for what you've said. But people do now in cancel culture because it's offended somebody. I'm hurt by this. This is hurtful to me. I take issue with this, therefore it cannot be there. And that's going to be a problem going forward. It's going to be a problem for a while, I think. Hudlicki's cancellation did not end there. A planned special issue of Synthesis in his honor was canceled. Invitations to speak at conferences and to review papers ceased. Citations to his papers were deleted, and collaborators were encouraged to dissociate themselves from him. The cancellation of geophysicist Dorian Abbott is another example of censoring an individual's scientific contributions because of his views on non-scientific matters. And I've covered it before on this channel many times. Dorian, like myself, does not agree with the current track of DEI, and he has posed an alternative framework of merit, fairness, and equality as opposed to diversity, equity, inclusion. Abbott had been invited to deliver a public lecture at MIT on climate and the potential for life on other planets. But a small group of activists, outraged by Abbott's advocacy for equal opportunity, fairness, and merit-based evaluation, and academic freedom, initiated a social media campaign to uninvite him. MIT quickly canceled the event, violating their own policy of open research and free interchange of information among scholars. And most MIT scholars, as I understood it, were pissed about it when that cancellation happened. These examples underscore authorities' responsibility to resist outrage mobs. Although outrage mobs often trigger the punishment process, in Western democracies, mobs no longer actually burn witches at stakes. Mobs do not get papers retracted. That is the decision of the editors and editorial boards. Thus, the key turning point in whether the academic mob is effective at punishing an academic for their idea is the action of authorities. So, next section, institutionalization of censorship. Our institutions and leaders are failing their missions. Rather than resist censorship, they enable it. In Hoodlicky's case, again, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, professional societies condemned the essay rather than the bullying campaign and the journal's decision to remove it. Likewise, in the Abbott case, MIT's leadership caved in to the mob's demands. These precedents create a chilling effect that inhibits the expression of non-conforming ideas throughout academia. Some institutions have actually institutionalized censorship. For example, the Royal Society of Chemistry, a major publisher, has issued guidelines for editors to consider whether or not any content might have the potential to cause offense. An RSC memo explains that the guidelines were developed in response to the Hoodlicky affair. The document elaborates, the aim of this guidance is to help you to identify and prevent the publication of inappropriate content in our journals and books. Words, depictions, and imagery have the potential to cause offense. There can be a disparity between the intention of the author and how the content might be received. It is the perception of the recipient that determines offense, regardless of the author's intent. The editors are instructed to be on the lookout for any content that could reasonably offend someone on the basis of their age, gender, race, sexual orientation, religious or political beliefs, marital or parental status, physical features, national origin, social status, or disability, or are likely to be upsetting, insulting, or objectionable to some or most people. I did actually cover the RSC thing. This was the other article that one of the other articles that Professor Krylov had been involved with. She has done quite a few in the last year or so on this topic. And it is really astounding that a journal would do that. That a journal publisher would give guidance to its editors to remove anything that could possibly be offensive. Somebody can be offended to anything. And that is a really bad idea to get into that. Oh my goodness. One might think a chemistry paper is an unlikely source of objectionable content. Not so. As documented, content that is objectionable to some includes the names of scientific discoveries and equations such as the Shockley quasar limit and Newton's laws, technical terms such as quantum supremacy, master password, and dummy variable, and a slew of plain English words. For example, normal allegedly makes most people feel excluded. So much for normal pH and the normal distribution. Some scholars are offended by capital letters, symbols of hierarchy and oppression. Following the guidelines are RSC editors now to prevent the publication of pH, standard unit of measurement in chemistry. The guidelines undermine RSC's mission, facilitating the communication of high-quality chemistry research and the advancement of chemical science. Censorship is antithetical to science. Rather than turning social media censorship into policy, scientific leadership worldwide should reject cancel culture and defend the core principle of science, the free exchange of ideas in the pursuit of the truth. Thank you, Professor Krylov et al. This is a brilliant piece, per usual. I don't have much to add on that other than to say that part of the reason I wanted to do this video was to just give it some airtime and actually have it read and add some comments off the top. Professor Krylov is quite an inspiration. A lot of these scientists, these STEM folks who are standing up and saying no more of this nonsense are absolutely an inspiration to a lot of us who want to see the craziness that we see now coming into STEM stop. Because we can recognize just how much harm it's going to have by comparing the push to not allow any critique if it offends somebody, will just cause the pursuit of the truth to crumble. And that usually doesn't end well, and scientific progress and innovation gets completely stunted when you're not allowed to have anybody who isn't ideologically in the same line. We know that from history. That's it for me, I think. Let me know what you think. And again, I'd go read this, share it with the world, please. Share the article with the world, if not the video. That would be great. Share the article, too. If you like the video, hit the like button on the way out the door. Share the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. Don't forget, come on over and join us in locals. This week, we are going to be talking about transformational social emotional learning and an article on that. That will be Thursday review tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Central Time. And, of course, for local supporters, live chat afterwards at 8 p.m. Central Time. I look forward to seeing y'all then. But until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you stay curious, my friends.